Tonight we'll continue our studies in the book of Psalms. We want to look at the 27th Psalm tonight. As we think about this psalm, the admonition David gives us, if you look in the very last verse, is to wait on the Lord. This psalm, there's different viewpoints about when this psalm was written or what it was written for. Some will say it was used by the king, by David himself, before he was going to go into battle. Others say that it is a psalm that he writes that just uses military metaphors. A very basic outline of this psalm. The first 6 verses deal with confidence that is expressed in the midst of trouble. Verses 7 down through verse 12, and lament is uttered in confidence. Verse 13 shows us the summation or a summative conclusion that ends with a statement of confidence. And then verse 14 is that admonition of patience. So let's see what it means to wait on the Lord. First of all, you need to recognize David's confidence. The first 6 verses deal with his confidence in who God is and what God does for him. Notice a few phrases in these verses. First of all, in verse 1, David says, "The Lord is my light." And when you think about that word light, not only in the Old Testament, but even in the New Testament, the word light has a very significant meaning. You and I will realize that it was light that was the first thing that God spoke into existence. We know that God is called light. Jesus himself is called light. And we know that we are called to walk in the light as he is in the light. But this idea with David talking about the Lord is my light, it is indicative of David's pursuit of walking with God and being in favor with God. David very simply is describing the fellowship that he has with God. Here he says, "I'm walking with you, and because I'm walking, I have great confidence that I do not fear anything." But notice the second phrase in verse 1. He goes on and he says, "The Lord is my salvation." Well, since God is light, and light illuminates the way, David here is currently expressing his confidence that God is his deliverer. He is the one, whether it be from his enemies or whether it be from the power of Satan himself. He recognizes God has the ability to deliver. You know, I think about David. And as you go back and you examine his life, would you agree with me that David, during his lifetime, had a lot of valleys where he was down, where he was being oppressed, and all of those things? Yet in all of the times and in any situation that he was in, he realized that God could deliver him because of the power that God has. And you know, David is not the only one whom God has shown his power. Think back, if you will, to the 15th chapter of the book of Genesis. When God spoke to Abraham, he told Abraham not to fear. When he told him, "I'm going to make of you a great nation," even though he had no son. Or think about Jacob as he moved his family to the land of Egypt. Because it was through that movement that Israel began to blossom as a nation. Or think about after the Israelites are out in the wilderness and they've wandered for 40 years before they're able to cross the Jordan. God told Joshua repeatedly to be courageous, be brave. Even Jeremiah, the weeping prophet. God told Jeremiah in Jeremiah chapter 1 and verse 8, do not be afraid of the task that is at hand. Do not be afraid to go and to speak to the nation. And I could go on and on and on with examples of where God has the power to deliver. Someone says, well, Brother Ray, all you've given us is Old Testament passages. How about we turn over to the book of Matthew, and we begin in chapter 10, verse 28. Matthew 10, verse 28. Notice what the Lord, our Jesus, says. He says, and do not fear those who can kill the body, but cannot, or do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. But rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a copper coin, and not one of them falls to the ground apart from your Father's will? But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Do not fear, therefore, you are of more value than many sparrows. Therefore, whoever confesses me before men, him will I also confess before my Father who is in heaven. Did you just see or hear what Jesus says about us? Are we not more valuable? Do we not have more value than many sparrows? Are we not the most valuable part of God's creation? He did say, what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? How much value do we have in God's sight? David recognized that it was God who sustained him. It was God who delivered him. But number 3, we go back to Psalm 27. And as we keep reading on down through the passage, he goes on and he says this aspect of the Lord is the stronghold of our life. Brethren, I look at that, and when I look at that particular passage, it is telling me that God is now the author. He's the one that is writing the pages, because He is our anchor in the midst of turmoil. He is that which keeps our ship steady in the times of rough seas. When you think about Jesus Himself, you remember the seas got rough and they went down into the bottom of the ship and they asked Jesus, "Do you not care that we are perishing?" And what did Jesus do? Did He not speak to the winds and the waves? And did He not say, "Peace, be still"? You see, Jesus, the stronghold, just as God was the stronghold for David. But when you come down and you begin in verse 4 and you go down through verse 6, David expresses his desire. And his desire is that he will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. David is describing a very intimate relationship that he has with God. He is telling us what God can do for us because he has done it for him. But then you come down through verse 7, down through verse 12, and you begin to realize that there's a little bit of a shift, and we see David's prayer. We see the prayer where he first of all expresses the need to be accepted. Hear, O Lord, when I cry with my voice. Have mercy upon me and answer me. When you said, seek my face, my heart said to you, your face, Lord, I will seek. Do not hide your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger. You have been my help. Do not leave me or forsake me, O God of my salvation. David is pleading with God for acceptance. How many of us want to be accepted by God? How many of us have faced rejection in this old world? Someone says, Ray, how can we be rejected? We can be rejected by our parents. We can even be rejected by our children. We may be rejected by our spouse or our friends, our employers, maybe even our co-workers. Maybe we can even be rejected by some people that we simply meet as we're journeying down the road of life. But just as David says, while we may be cast away by all those in the world, God will not abandon us. God is always there. David realizes the depth of God's love in these verses. In verse 9, David cries out very plainly to God who has been there and will always be there for him. But not only in this prayer that David prays does he need acceptance. It's a prayer that needs to be heard. Continue in verse 11. Teach me your way, O Lord, and lead me in a smooth path because of my enemies. Do not deliver me to the will of my adversaries, for false witnesses have risen against me, and such as breathe out violence. I would have lost heart unless I had believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Who needs to hear the prayer of David? Who is it that needs to hear this prayer? Does God need to hear this prayer? Yes, but who else? David needs to say and try to set an example for those who are living around him. You see, the one who wants to listen to us and is never too busy for us, that's usually what? The last person we want to talk to. You see, but God is the one who on whom we can place our burdens. We can lay our load upon him. Perhaps we don't see our Father in heaven as David did. Perhaps we do not see him as the one true living God, the one who is perfect for us in any situation that come up. How many times have you heard people say, I'm here if you want to talk? You know, oftentimes people do want to talk, but they don't want you to talk, they want you to listen. Understand something. There is no better listener than God. No one can help us with our cries better than God. No one can give us peace in the midst of our turmoil better than God. David asked for guidance. I think that's appropriate in this text. David makes an appeal. He prays. And his prayer is about God guiding him. I saw a picture on Facebook just yesterday. It was an individual looking up in the clouds, and he said, God, we need to have a talk. And God stretched his arms down from heaven, and he held his word to this gentleman. We need to talk to God. We need God to talk to us, which he does through his word. We need to be confident as we stand before the throne of God in our prayers. David needs protection. He's appealing to God to protect him from his adversaries, from his enemies. The enemies of David. I think it is evident that the enemies of David are in the back of his mind. He's always worried about who is there. Do we worry about who is our enemy or who our enemy is? You see, we don't think about our enemy as often as we should. But then lastly, this afternoon in Psalm 27, look at verse 13 and verse 14. First of all, verse 13 says, I would have lost heart unless I had believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Do you realize David is giving a statement of great confidence? What is it that David is so confident in when he writes these words? He's confident, number one, knowing that God will hear his prayer. And secondly, that God will answer his prayer. David realizes that he's not holding on to some false hope. David walks with God, and he knows that God walks with him. David understands God's timing, not man's timing. You see, unfortunately for us today, we have learned bad habits about always wanting an answer now. We want a solution to a problem immediately. Just the other night I was watching a television show about a cruise ship over in the Mediterranean that capsized. It laid over on its side. It laid there for 2 years while they figured out how they were going to upright it and how they were going to remove it. He said, well, for 2 years, that's not. The people that lived where that ship went aground was a beautiful little town. And I'm sure all the people in that town were saying, I wish they'd hurry up and get that out of here. I wish they would do it tomorrow. But brethren, things take time. And we need to understand that we need to wait for the Lord because his timing is not our timing. And that's exactly what he says in verse 14. When he says, wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he shall strengthen your heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. What does Paul say? Paul says that we should be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that our labor is not in vain. Paul's telling us the same thing David is, just using different words. David says, wait on the Lord. Just as God instructed Abraham, Jacob and his family, Joshua, Jeremiah, and all the other prophets. Just as God had instructed them to be courageous, you and I, as the people of God, need to be courageous today. We need to show resilience. We need to show persistence. You and I cannot cave in to the first obstacle that comes along. The question tonight is, do you have a strong heart that is ready to meet any challenge? Have you strengthened your mind so that you're ready to do whatever is required to serve the Lord? Brethren, we understand that courage is the absence of fear. It is the overcoming of fear through a confident faith. Can you and I say, as David did as he began this song, the Lord is my light and my salvation. If you and I are not walking with God and working to draw near to Him, there's no way that we can have the confidence that David expressed in Psalm 27. You see, we must wait for the Lord, and He will provide all that we have need of. Tonight, will you wait for Him? Not next Sunday, 2 weeks from tonight, we're going to cover chapter 28 in the book of Psalms. And that lesson will be titled, While Waiting on the Lord. What do we do while we wait? We first need to learn the patience that we must wait for Him. He is there, He understands, and He wants us to be faithful and obedient. Tonight, if one is not a Christian and you need to put Christ on in baptism, you can do that. Or tonight, if you're here and your life hasn't been what it should be, you can come home tonight, repenting and confessing of sin in your life. Whatever your need might be, our prayers should come while we stand and while we sing.